Staff Sergeant Rourke picked up the new arrival's deployment file, glanced at the name on the cover, and set it back down on the table without opening it. Then he turned to the three men behind him and said, loud enough to carry across the entire ready room, "They sent us a girl." He said it the way a man announces a weather delay. Inconvenient. Unfortunate. Not a serious problem, just one more thing to manage. The woman standing in the doorway heard it. She set her kit bag on the floor, zipped it closed with one deliberate pull, and walked to the briefing table without being invited. Her name was Sergeant Dana Carver. She did not introduce herself. Before this story goes further, if you believe that real courage deserves to be told, subscribe to this channel and follow this story to the end. And drop a comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The forward operating base in northeastern Syria was the kind of place that looked temporary and had been there for 3 years. Prefabricated barriers, repurposed shipping containers, a communications tower that leaned 2 degrees off vertical because the ground beneath it had shifted in a mortar strike 6 months prior, and no one had gotten around to fixing it. The desert around it was flat in every direction, which was either reassuring or unnerving depending on how long you'd been there. Visibility was good. There was nowhere to hide anything within 500 meters. Beyond that, the terrain changed. Low ridgelines to the east, a dry riverbed cutting north to south that channeled wind and would channel other things if anyone decided to use it for that purpose. Carver had looked at all of it from the helicopter on approach. She had taken a photograph with her eyes. She had been a designated marksman for 9 years, which meant that her relationship with distance was different from most people's. Distance for most people was a passive thing, something that existed between you and where you were going. For Carver, distance was a problem with a solution, a variable with a correct answer, a space that could be read and measured and navigated with the right preparation and the right patience. She had learned this not in any classroom but on a range in rural Georgia when she was 19 years old, watching her uncle, a retired Army Ranger, explain how the wind moved differently at 300 yards than at 500, and how understanding that difference was what separated someone who could shoot from someone who could hit. She had taken that distinction and spent 9 years making it sharper. The ready room had 6 people in it when she arrived. Rourke was the most senior among them by rank and by the volume of his own opinions. He was 38, built like someone who had been athletic young and maintained it through habit rather than enthusiasm. And he wore his combat experience with the specific heaviness of a man who had decided it was the most important thing about him. The other 5 arranged themselves around him with the practiced ease of a group that had been operating together long enough to have assigned positions in any room they entered. She knew the type. She had been in rooms with this type for 9 years. The team's commanding officer, Captain Kessler, was in the communications container when Carver arrived. He came in 20 minutes later, saw her at the briefing table, and did not react the way Rourke had reacted. He handed her a cup of coffee, said, "Sergeant Carver, I've read your file," and sat down across from her. "Good to have you." She said, "What's the threat picture?" Not a question, an opening. Kessler looked at her for a moment. Then he started talking. He spoke for 12 minutes. She asked 4 questions. Each one she could see surprised him, not because they were impressive, but because they demonstrated that she had not been listening to the briefing, she had been processing it, which was a different and more demanding thing. By the end of the 12 minutes, something had shifted in the way he looked at her. Small shift, barely visible, but there. Specialist Darren Omura was 24 and had been with the unit for 10 months. He was waiting outside the communications container when the briefing ended, positioned to her left, which told her something. People who positioned themselves to your left in a new environment were either trained or instinctive protectors. She filed that away. "Sergeant Carver," he said, "I'll show you the layout. I can find it." Kessler said I would, he said, not moving, not apologizing. She looked at him. He was serious-faced and careful, and he had the look of someone who had been doing this long enough to stop trying to seem older than he was. She nodded once and started walking. He fell in beside her. He showed her the base layout with the efficiency of someone who had given this orientation before and had identified which details actually mattered. The generator noise pattern that would mask radio traffic on the eastern frequency, the 20-second gap in the northern sentry rotation, the water supply lag that made the southwestern corner of the base functionally deaf to incoming audio for 4 minutes at the top of every hour. She filed all of it. Rourke's going to make it difficult, Omura said after a few minutes of walking. He already has. He's not wrong about everything. He's a good operator. Omura was quiet for a second. The way he processes new people takes time, and he doesn't always recognize when his process is the problem. Carver looked at him. How long have you known that about him? About 6 months. And you're still here. The mission doesn't change based on who's running the briefing, he said simply. She almost said something. Chose not to. They walked the rest of the perimeter in silence, and she used the time to do what she had been doing since the helicopter. Reading the ground. That first night, she did not sleep before 0200. She sat on her bunk with her field notebook open and worked. Elevation data from the maps in the communications container. Wind pattern approximations based on what she had observed during the day. The way dust moved across the eastern ridgeline in the late afternoon, the way it changed behavior near the dry riverbed, potential overwatch positions if the team was required to move into the low-ground terrain to the southeast, behavioral notes on the people she had been watching since arrival. She was still writing when she heard the crunch of boots stop outside her door. You're awake, Omura said through the door. Working. Saw your light. She set the notebook down. One question. Why'd you come here? He said it without inflection, not asking why she'd chosen this particular unit, in this particular forward position, when someone with her record could have gone a dozen places, asking something smaller, more specific, why she was still going. She looked at the wall. There was a photograph in her jacket pocket. There had been for 4 years. Go get some sleep, Omura, she said. A pause. Then his boots moved away. She picked up the pen and kept writing. The next morning, Rourke escalated. It began at breakfast, in the way that these things always begin in close quarters unit life, casually, with an audience, in a setting where anyone watching could tell themselves afterward that they hadn't really seen what they saw. Carver sat at the far end of the table going over her notes in her head and eating in the methodical way of someone who had learned to treat meals as refueling rather than occasions. She was aware of Rourke settling in 3 seats down with Specialist Thane and Corporal Breck. Looked you up, Rourke said, to the air in front of him, the technique of a man who had learned to push without leaving fingerprints. Fort Campbell, you were on a 4-person team, 7-month deployment in Mali. She continued eating. 2 of your team are retired now, medical. He paused. Early retirement. Thane shifted in his seat. Even Breck, who tracked Rourke's energy the way a compass tracks north, looked slightly elsewhere. Interesting timing, Rourke said. Carver set down her fork. She turned and looked at Rourke directly, with the steady attention of someone identifying a problem they have already solved and are confirming the solution. Sergeant Rourke, she said. 2 of my teammates sustained injuries in the line of duty and are alive because of decisions made during that deployment. She held his gaze. If you'd like to know what those decisions were, ask me directly. I'll tell you. But I'm not going to sit here while you imply something you don't have the information to imply. The table was quiet. Rourke opened his mouth, closed it. Something moved behind his eyes. Recalculation. The specific surprise of a man who had poked something expecting give and found resistance instead. He said nothing. At the far end of the table, Omura was looking at his coffee, but she noticed, when she turned back to her food, that his posture had changed in a way she recognized. Not relief. Something quieter than that. The posture of someone who had been waiting for a particular thing to happen and was now watching it happen. The range qualification came that afternoon. Standard procedure for a new specialist, integrating into an established unit. Kessler called it calibration. Carver understood what it actually was. She had been through it enough times to recognize both the professional necessity and the performance underneath it. The men came out to watch because they had decided, before she fired a single round, what they expected to see. The range sat at the base of the eastern ridgeline. Targets at 300 meters, 500, 700, 900. The conditions were poor in the specific way that desert range conditions were poor. Wind off the ridge and variable gusts. Heat shimmer distorting sight picture at the longer distances. Afternoon sun at the wrong angle. She had shot in worse. She had trained herself to shoot well in worse because she had understood since she was 19 years old that conditions on a range were a controlled version of conditions in the field, and conditions in the field did not cooperate. She set up without hurry. The ritual was the same, regardless of audience. Prone position, bipod deployed, cheek weld breathing, the slow narrowing of the world down to one relationship, The barrel, the air, the target, 300 meters, center mass. A round of muted acknowledgement from the watching team, polite, unsurprised. 300 was table stakes, 500, center mass. The acknowledgement changed tone, still guarded, but something different underneath, 700. The wind gusted across the line of fire at the moment of trigger press, a lateral push that should have moved the impact point significantly. The round hit center mass, silence from the watching men, not the silence of disinterest. The silence of people who came expecting to confirm something and are now uncertain of what they are confirming. 900 meters. She read the wind for 90 seconds. Not the wind at her position. That number was known, measurable, manageable. She was reading the wind along the full flight path, which was a different and more complex problem. She tracked the dust patterns at 400 meters. She watched the way a strip of engineer tape she had asked Omura to hang on a stake at 600 moved against the wind direction at the target. She calculated the differential, she adjusted her hold, she breathed, she fired. The 900-meter target dropped. The silence that followed was the kind that lasts long enough to become its own statement. Then someone in the back, she never saw who, started a slow clap. It spread, reluctant at first, and then something more genuine underneath, the sound of people who came with a verdict and are now finding the verdict requires revision. Rourke was gone when she turned around. He had left before the last shot. That evening, Omura found her on the eastern berm, standing in the cooling desert air, watching the ridgeline in the last minutes before full dark. "You didn't have to say anything to him at breakfast," Omura said. "No, you could have let the range speak. That's what I did." She paused. "What I said at breakfast wasn't defense. It was information. There's a difference." She looked at the ridgeline. "A man like Rourke doesn't stop doubting you because you're good at your job. He stops when he understands that his doubts are less accurate than your judgment. That's a different kind of proof." Omura was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the berm and lifted thin sand past their boots. "What happened in Mali?" he said. Not a question. The careful way of someone who has earned the right to not ask. She was quiet long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. "We were moving on intelligence that had a source problem," she said finally. "Not bad intelligence by accident. Bad intelligence by design. Someone upstream had a reason to want us in a specific position at a specific time." She stopped. "Two of my teammates paid for it physically. I paid for it differently." "You're still paying," he said. She said nothing, which was its own answer. "The intelligence source," he said after a moment. "Did they ever?" "No," she said. "They didn't." She looked at the dark ridgeline. "That's why I'm here." He absorbed this the way careful people absorb significant information. Without reaction on the surface, with considerable movement underneath. "Get some sleep, Omura," she said. "Something in these ridgelines has been too quiet for the last 48 hours. He looked where she was looking. "You think?" "I think quiet in desert terrain is a data point," she said. "And I've been collecting data since I landed." She walked back toward the base. Behind her, he stood on the berm for a long moment looking at the ridgelines, trying to see what she had seen. He couldn't, not yet. But he was beginning to understand that Sergeant Carver did not say things without reasons, and that whatever was collecting itself in the stillness beyond the wire, she had already begun to orient toward it. 3 days passed. The base shifted in the specific way that close-quarters units shift when something has changed in the unspoken agreement between people who live and work in the same compressed space. The name they had started calling her, under their breath, in the corners of rooms. He had been there long enough to know what it was. Omura had told her without telling her. By the specific silence he kept on the subject, that name stopped appearing. Not because anyone ordered it gone, because the men who had used it most freely were now the ones who found somewhere else to look when she walked into a room. There is a particular kind of silence that replaces contempt when contempt has been made to look foolish. Bravo Element wore that silence for 3 days. Rourke wore the loudest silence of all. He had not spoken directly to Carver since the breakfast confrontation. He navigated around her like water around stone. She noticed this and registered it without sentiment. A man like Rourke did not change his assessment. He recalculated, and recalculation was more dangerous than the original opinion, because recalculation had patience. On the 4th morning, Omura sat across from her in the mess with his coffee mug and his careful eyes and said quietly that Rourke had put in a request to have the unit's overwatch assignment restructured. "Restructured how?" she said. "He wants the position rotated between qualified shooters in the unit. Says it's better for team cohesion. He wants me off the dedicated Overwatch role. Omura looked at his mug. Kessler denied it. We've got an operation in 72 hours and the qualified shooter list inside this unit is shorter than he'd like it to be. A pause. Kessler didn't say that last part. I'm inferring. What's the operation? Supply convoy. We're moving pharmaceutical resupply to a clinic in a village called Hadra, about 35 kilometers southeast through the valley corridor. He set down his mug. The road closes when the sandstorm system comes through. That's in 4 days. After that, it's impassable for at least 3 weeks. How many people in Hadra? About 250, mostly elderly and children. He met her eyes. There are 2 medical workers, one of them trained in a man. She was quiet for a moment. And the threat assessment for the valley corridor. Omura's pause was half a second. She caught it. What? She said. The official assessment is moderate, possible insurgent presence in the northern ridgeline sector, manageable with appropriate overwatch and route security. He looked at her steadily. The unofficial picture is that Corporal Thane ran a reconnaissance patrol through the southern end of the corridor 6 days ago. He came back and went straight to Rourke. I don't know exactly what he said, but Rourke went to Kessler's office afterward, and when he came out, the risk assessment was unchanged. Carver felt something shift in her chest, not fear, pattern recognition. The specific feeling of data points beginning to resolve into a shape she recognized. Thane say anything to you? He told me the valley felt wrong. No local movement, no livestock, no farmers, nobody in the road. He said the last time a route felt that empty. It was before an IED series that took out 2 vehicles in Mosul. The mess sounds continued around them. Someone's radio in the next container, the permanent background hum of the generator. What was Rourke's reaction? When Thane told him, he said Thane was reading too much into absence of pattern, said the intelligence was solid. Omura's jaw tightened slightly. Said anyone who couldn't handle a moderate risk corridor should say so now. She stood and picked up her mug. I need to talk to Kessler. He's in pre-op planning until 1400. I'll wait. She did not wait long. Kessler was moving at 11:20, jacket half-buttoned, the specific velocity of a commanding officer with 14 things in motion. He saw her outside the communications container and read her face. Walk with me, he said. She told him what she had observed. Not Omura's account of Thane's report. That was secondhand, and she had no way to verify it without burning a source she needed. She told him what she had seen herself, the dust pattern behavior on the eastern ridgeline over 3 days of observation, the specific quality of stillness in the valley floor, visible from the berm each evening, the 3 natural choke points she had identified on the corridor route from the maps, places where the road narrowed and the terrain above provided overlapping elevated coverage. She told him quietly, precisely, without inflection. When she finished, Kessler was looking at a point on the motor pool wall. You're describing a prepared position scenario, he said. I'm describing terrain characteristics consistent with prepared positions, she said. I can't confirm enemy presence from observation alone. I'm telling you what the ground is telling me. And I'm telling you that if I were going to set an ambush on that route, those 3 choke points are where I'd put it. She paused. I'm very good at knowing where to put things. Kessler turned to look at her, the look of a man running 2 calculations simultaneously. Our alternative route adds 6 hours, he said. In the weather window we have, that's the difference between completing this mission and not completing it. I know. 250 people in that village. I know. He rubbed the back of his neck. You could be reading the terrain incorrectly. I could be, she said. I'm not. He looked at her for a long moment. I'll review the alternative timing options. He started to move. Thank you, Sergeant. He stopped. Don't share this with the element yet if it reaches Rourke. He stopped himself. He'll do what? She said. Kessler met her eyes. He'll make sure the conversation stops, he said. And the specific flatness in his voice told her that what he meant was considerably more than an administrative concern. She walked back to her quarters and opened her field notebook. She wrote, Kessler knows something about Rourke's relationship to the Valley intelligence. Rourke suppressed Thane's patrol report. The intelligence chain showing moderate risk may not be neutral. Verify source. She stared at what she had written. Then she wrote one more line, Mom, I think I'm close. She closed the notebook. The operational briefing came the following morning at 05:30. Kessler ran it himself, which was notable. He typically delegated. The fact that he was standing at the front of the room told the experienced people in it that this one was weighted differently. Rourke stood in the front row, arms crossed, the posture of a man who had already decided what he thought about everything he was about to hear. Carver stood near the back. Kessler covered the route, the timeline, the vehicle assignments, the cargo manifest. He covered the threat assessment, officially moderate, and the contingency plans. He assigned Carver as Overwatch lead, operating independently from the convoy to provide long-range coverage from elevated position along the corridor. When he said her name and assignment, the room changed temperature. Some of the response was residual. The 4 days of accumulated Rourke-shaped skepticism built into the unit's atmosphere. Some was genuine, the specific tension of men who had watched her shoot and were now revising what they thought they knew and weren't sure where the revision landed. And some of it was Rourke himself, who did not turn around, but whose neck went rigid and whose head angled slightly left. That angle, she had come to understand, was Rourke deciding something. The briefing ended. People moved toward vehicles and equipment. Omura appeared at her elbow. "You good?" "Stay close to Kessler during movement," she said. "Don't let Rourke get ahead of him." Omura frowned. "That's a specific instruction." "Yes," she looked at him steadily. "Can you do it?" He held her gaze, nodded. "Good." She moved toward the equipment bay. "Carver." He used her last name the way people use last names when they mean something more than last names. She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Be careful out there." She almost said something dismissive. She had a long habit of deflecting care because care required something from her that cost something. She looked back at him and saw in his face something that was not worry born of underestimation. It was the worry of someone who had been paying attention. "You too, Omura," she said. She walked into the pre-dawn dark. The 4 hours before departure were what pre-mission hours always were. Stretched and compressed simultaneously, full of urgency and dead space in alternating waves. She used the time the way she always used it. She went back to the eastern berm and watched the ridgelines. What she saw in the last 40 minutes before she needed to move made her chest tight. The dust behavior along the northern ridgeline had changed overnight. In 2 specific locations, the natural wind-driven accumulation against rock faces was wrong. Not obviously wrong. Wrong in the way that requires years of reading terrain to catch. The kind of wrong that meant disruption. That meant recent movement. That meant bodies. She confirmed both locations twice. Then she ran. Kessler was with his executive officer running final checks. He saw her face and separated himself. "North ridgeline," she said, low and controlled. 2 positions confirmed from dust disruption patterns. Possible additional coverage on the south face. "I can't read that angle from the berm." Confidence, 85 on the 2 northern positions. The south face is inference. He absorbed this. "We go," he said. The village doesn't have 3 weeks. She had known he would say it. She had come not to change the decision, but to make sure it was made with everything she knew. "Then I need to be on the ridgeline before the convoy enters the valley floor," she said. "I need a 25-minute head start. Solo ascent on the western approach." He looked at her. "There are faster climbers in?" "No," she said, quietly, fully. A silence. 25 minutes, he said. "Go." She was moving toward the equipment bay when she heard Rourke's voice behind her, directed at Thane, too low to catch fully but not low enough. She filtered the background noise the way her training had taught her to filter it. She heard, already staged. She stopped walking. She did not turn around. She heard Rourke say, "Stick to the timeline." And then something she couldn't catch from Thane. And then Rourke, in a register that was not the register of professional instruction, "Just run your part." She walked to the equipment bay. She put on her gear with completely steady hands. Rifle pack, cold weather layer for the elevation comms. She checked everything twice, not because she doubted herself, but because the ritual grounded her in the physical present. She thought about what she had heard, already staged. She thought about the intelligence source behind the moderate risk assessment. She thought about 4 years ago in Mali, in a mission that had gone wrong in a way that wasn't accidental. She thought about a classified debrief she had attended 3 months after that deployment. A debrief where a name had appeared as a communications contact in 2 compromised operations across different theaters. A name she had not been able to trace further because she didn't have the access. She had come to this unit because she had eventually, patiently followed the thread to this region, to this type of operation, to the specific corridor that ran through this valley. Her mother had taught her patience. She shouldered her pack and walked out into the dark. Omura was at the gate. "Making sure you get to the departure point." I know." He kept pace with her. Carver, something you should know. I was running a comms check on secondary channel 11 20 minutes ago. I picked up traffic that wasn't ours. She stopped walking. She turned to look at him. His face in the pre-dawn was serious in a way that left no room for the usual things. "In Ted," he said, short burst. "Our system flagged the frequency pattern, matched a signature from a known insurgent relay network." He held her eyes. Signal originated from inside the wire. The dark was complete around them. The bass sounds continued their ordinary rhythm. "Does Kessler know?" she said. "I went to tell him. Rourke was with him. I couldn't say it in front of Rourke." Carver stood completely still. The picture completed itself. The false intelligence. Thane's report suppressed. The signal from inside the wire, already staged. The same pattern as Molly, in a different desert 4 years later, connected by the same thread she had been following since the classified debrief where the name had first appeared. She looked at Omura. "Tell Kessler when Rourke is not present. Channel 11, signal origin inside the wire. Don't tell Thane, don't tell Breck, no one." She looked at the ridgeline black against the sky that was just beginning to separate itself from darkness. "I'm going up, Carver. I have been working toward this for 4 years," she said. "Not this convoy. This specific moment. I know what's in that valley, and I know who put it there, and I know what needs to happen." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him processing it, not just the tactical information, but the weight underneath it. 4 years, specific moment. "Your mother," he said quietly, not a question. She met his eyes. "Go find Kessler," she said. "Now." She turned and walked toward the ridgeline. The darkness ahead was complete, and she moved into it without slowing. Behind her, she heard his boots turn and move quickly back toward the command container. Somewhere above her, in the cold and the stillness of terrain that had been holding its breath for days, something was waiting. So was she. She had been climbing for 19 minutes when the first explosion hit. The concussion traveled through the rock face and into her chest before the sound arrived. Then the sound rolled up the slope and scattered loose stone across the ledge she was using for her left handhold. She registered it. Vehicle strike, likely lead position. She climbed faster. The radio on her vest came alive with overlapping voices, the layered chaos of a unit that has just been hit and is simultaneously trying to fight, communicate, and locate a threat they cannot see. Kessler's voice cut through it, controlled and precise. "Overwatch, report." She keyed the radio without slowing. Not yet in position. 90 seconds, she moved. The ledge she had identified from the satellite imagery was exactly where the geometry said it would be. She pulled herself onto it, went prone, deployed the rifle in the sequence her body knew without instruction. The valley opened below her, and what she saw stopped her breath for exactly 1 second, before training converted it into geometry. The convoy was pinned, lead vehicle burning. Second vehicle stopped, taking fire from 2 directions simultaneously. Not opportunistic fire, coordinated fire, professional fire from elevated positions that had been established before the convoy entered the corridor. The Marines below were working from limited cover. She could see 2 figures down and not moving, and others moving in the injured way that was worse than stillness because it meant they were still trying to fight. She found the first position in under 5 seconds. North ridgeline, approximately 350 from her, 600 from the convoy. Muzzle signature between 2 rock faces. The disturbed dust pattern she had observed from the berm corresponded exactly. She breathed out. She fired. The muzzle signature disappeared. North ridgeline, first position suppressed. Engaging. On her radio, Kessler's voice came back immediately. "Copy. Good to hear you." She moved her scope. Second position, south face, higher than she'd been able to read from the base. Whoever designed this ambush understood overlapping coverage. The southern positions were placed to catch anyone who broke cover toward the natural escape routes. She found the second position from the impact pattern on the second vehicle, tracked backward along the trajectory. She fired. The impact pattern changed. 2 down. The radio traffic below shifted. Not relief, not yet, but the specific change in tone that happens when men who are completely pinned begin to believe the pin might lift. "Overwatch? We have wounded. Multiple. Need suppression on the south face there's still fire from." She was already there. Third position, south face, lower than the second, using a ground fold in the terrain she had marked on the imagery as a likely placement. She confirmed it now from the firing signature, an automatic weapon, which made it the most dangerous active threat to the Marines below. She put 2 rounds into it. The automatic fire stopped. 3 down. The ambush rhythm changed. It didn't end, but its coordination frayed at the edges. The remaining fire was more cautious, less confident. They knew there was a counter-sniper and they didn't know where she was. She kept moving her scope across the valley. She watched Omura below drag a wounded man behind the burning lead vehicle. She watched him do it without cover, fast and low, with the controlled terror of someone who was afraid and doing it anyway. She watched him get the man behind the vehicle and turn to return fire toward the ridgeline. Wrong direction, but it didn't matter. Returning fire mattered more than accuracy right now. It told the remaining shooters that the men below were not broken. She keyed the radio. Omura, north ridgeline is clear. The fourth position is south face, high, above the second bend in the route. A pause, breathing hard. Copy, working on it. Fourth position, above the second bend. She had been tracking it for 60 seconds, waiting for a clean sight picture, because a rock formation created a narrow window, and she needed movement before she could confirm. The shooter moved. She fired. 4 down. Then Kessler. Overwatch, still taking fire from unknown position. 2 vehicles, mobility killed. We can't move. She pulled back from the scope for 3 full seconds. The fire reaching the convoy was precise, selective. It was cutting off movement routes, maintaining the pin with minimum ammunition expenditure. This was not volume fire. This was placement fire. The kind that came from someone who thought in the same language she thought in. A sniper. A real one. And not in any of the 4 positions she had cleared. She forced herself to think from the other direction. If she were running this ambush, if she were the senior shooter on the opposing side, responsible for the integrity of the entire operation, where would she be? Not on the main ridgelines. Counter-sniper pressure from above would compromise those positions first. Not on the valley floor. She looked at the western approach to the valley, a section she had not been able to read from the berm because the angle was wrong. A rock formation she had noted on the imagery and assessed as a poor firing position because the approach from the base side of the valley was difficult. But from the other direction, from outside the corridor, from the network's own access route, the approach was protected. The distance settled in her chest. 840 meters. Variable desert wind. Limited sight picture. And a shooter who had already demonstrated that they were very good. She keyed the radio. 5th position is western approach, behind the primary rock formation at grid. She gave the coordinates from memory, approximately 840 from my position. This is the command element. All personnel maintain cover. Do not attempt to move until I clear it. Kessler's response was immediate. Copy. Confidence. She looked at the position. She could not see the shooter. She was inferring from effect, from the pattern of fire, from the target selection, from the timing. Hi, she said. Give me 3 minutes. Kessler, you have 3 minutes. I have men bleeding. She clicked off the radio. She breathed. This was the moment that training could not fully prepare a person for, and character determined the outcome of. She had been climbing for 19 minutes. Her hands were at the edge of the cold, where cold becomes its own kind of interference. The ledge was narrow and angled. None of it mattered in the sense of mattering. It had to be done. It was going to be done. She thought about her mother, not the photograph, the actual woman. Her hands, which were quick and precise with everything they touched. Her voice, which never performed calm. It simply was calm, the calm of someone who had decided that panic was a luxury she could not afford, and had made the decision so long ago that the decision had become a fact about her. The way she had raised Carver, not by telling her what to think, but by showing her what to pay attention to. Her mother had been an intelligence analyst. She had spent 22 years tracking networks that operated in the gray space between state actors and non-state actors, in the corridors between what could be proven and what could be suspected. She had been working on something specific, a communications network that had compromised 3 operations across 2 regions, when she was killed in a vehicle accident in Amman 4 years ago. An accident that 3 separate independent analysts, reviewing the evidence at Carver's request over the following 18 months, had described as unlikely to be accidental. The file her mother had been building, the name in the file, the thread that led here. Carver had not come to this unit because it was a good posting. She stopped fighting the ledge angle and worked with it, adjusting her position to use the slope rather than resist it. She stopped fighting the cold in her hands and let them settle into the specific numbness that was actually steadier than warmth. She tracked the wind at the base of the target formation, at the midpoint of the flight path, at 2 reference points. She identified the rotation pattern. The wind off the western rock formation was not consistent. It rotated in a 6 to 9 second cycle as it came around the curved face. The window of minimum deflection was at the rotation peak. 2 seconds. She needed to fire inside that window. She watched 6 complete cycles to confirm, adjusted for 840 meters of drop. Factored the angle of her position, she breathed out. She counted. The rotation peaked. The wind at the base of the formation moved in a specific way she had learned to read. She fired. She watched through the scope for a long moment. The fire from that position stopped completely. Stopped in the absolute way that told her what she needed to know. The valley went quiet in the way that valleys go quiet after sustained fire. Not peace. The exhaustion of something that has spent itself. She keyed the radio. 5th position cleared. Valley is clean. You can move. A pause. Then Kessler's voice, and something underneath his voice that she recognized as a man moving past the boundary he usually kept between himself and the moment he was in. Copy, Overwatch. Good work. She began breaking down her position. She was 30 meters below the ledge on her descent when the secondary radio caught a transmission. Brief. Encoded. The same frequency pattern Omura had described to her in the pre-dawn dark before the convoy departed. Channel 11. Coming from the valley floor. From inside the convoy position. She stopped moving. One hand against the rock face. She let the 10-second transmission complete itself. In the silence afterward, she understood something she had been approaching for 4 years. The signal origin in Mali, the name in her mother's file, the compromised operations that had connected them. The person at the operational level, the coordinator who had designed the ambush and was still alive and communicating from inside the convoy position, wearing American equipment, that person was not the top of the network. Her mother's file had been building towards something larger. The name in it was a contact point, not the source. There was a level above it still operational. And the transmission on Channel 11 was a status report going upward. She started moving down faster than was comfortable because there were still men in the valley who did not know that the most dangerous person among them was standing next to them. She came down the ridgeline in 17 minutes. The valley floor was reorganizing around the aftermath of a fight. Medics at the casualty collection point, vehicles being assessed, Marines in the methodical post-contact motioning of people who have been in something and are now determining what it cost. Kessler saw her coming and moved to intercept. He had a split above his right ear from what looked like debris. He was moving clean. 5 positions cleared, she said, reaching him, already scanning every face in the position. Where is Rourke? Kessler's expression shifted. Why? Where is he right now? East side. He caught her arm. Carver! What's happening? She looked at him directly. After I left for the ridgeline this morning, did Omura find you alone? Something moved behind his eyes. Yes, Channel 11, I know, Kessler said. And his voice had the specific weight of a man putting down something he has been carrying alone. I've known for 8 weeks. The number landed on her. 8 weeks. I've been building the case. I needed more than a frequency pattern. I needed something that would hold up. He looked away briefly. He requested that Overwatch go to Sergeant Breck. Breck is on medical leave. His jaw was tight. He didn't know you were coming. He thought the position would be empty. She absorbed the full shape of it. She respected the calculation. The human part of her was not interested in respect. You ran a convoy into a prepared ambush, she said. I put the best shooter I had access to on the ridgeline, he said. Quietly, not an excuse. I put you there. She held his gaze for a long moment. He's still transmitting, she said. The Channel 11 signal I picked up from the ridgeline after the 5th position, that was a status report going out. Upward, to the coordinator. She kept her voice even. Whoever Rourke reports to doesn't have the full picture yet. There's a window. Kessler went still. A window for what? He's going to receive a response. When it comes, if I'm back on the ridgeline, I can triangulate the source from the signal characteristics. She reached into the side pocket of her pack. I have equipment that can do it. I've been carrying it for 18 months. I've been waiting for a transmission worth tracing. The silence between them was 4 seconds. Your mother's case, he said. Not an accusation, an arrival. She built the file, Carver said. I just needed to get close enough to finish it. Kessler looked at the burning lead vehicle. He looked at the men along the valley wall doing their jobs with the uncomplaining professionalism of people who signed up for hard things and were now in one. He looked at all of it for a long moment. You have 30 minutes before extraction, he said. After that, I cannot account for your position. She was already moving toward the ridgeline. Carver. She didn't slow. His voice quietly. Get it? She climbed. The second ascent was harder than the first in every way that mattered physically, and did not matter in any of the ways that mattered otherwise. She reached the ledge in 21 minutes. She deployed the triangulation receiver, a piece of equipment 2 years in the waiting, and she set it up from muscle memory, and then she waited. Below her, the valley ran its extraction. She could see the casualty collection point, 4 figures being tended. She could see Omura moving between them with the focused efficiency of someone who had taken on a role and was not going to put it down. She could see Kessler managing the extraction with the dual attention of a commander running 2 simultaneous realities. And she could see Rourke. He was at the north end of the casualty collection point, facing outward in a security posture that was technically correct and practically wrong. The wrong kind of stillness. Waiting, not watching. 11 minutes later, the receiver activated. The transmission was 24 seconds. She watched the receiver log it, the signal resolving into coordinates with the unhurried precision of a piece of equipment, doing exactly what it was built to do. She looked at the coordinates. The transmission source was not in Syria. It was in Istanbul, a commercial address associated with a logistics company that had appeared as a footnote in a signals intelligence annex her mother had filed 14 months before she died. An annex flagged as requiring follow-up investigation. The follow-up had never been assigned. Her mother had found it before she had found her mother's file. She had been 3 months behind her mother's trail for 4 years. She secured the receiver in her pack. Then she sat on the ledge for 60 seconds and did what she had not allowed herself to do since the day she read the classified debrief and understood what it meant. She let herself feel it, all of it. The grief she had been running as fuel for 4 years. The specific grief of losing someone to something deliberate, something that had a name and a location and a logistics address in a city she had never visited. The love for a woman who had been doing the same work she was doing and had not made it to the end of the thread. 60 seconds. Then she stood up and started down the mountain. She was halfway down when Omura's voice came through the radio, controlled but effortful. Overwatch, this is Omura. Situation. Rourke is moving. He's heading north, away from the casualty collection. The 2 assets Kessler had on him, he made them. He's running. She looked down the valley, calculating, is Kessler aware? Dealing with extraction vehicles. 2 minutes out. He doesn't know yet. A pause. Carver. I'm going after him. Omura. He's going to move into the northern approach terrain if he gets into that ground in this visibility. I know. I'm going. His voice was steady, young, certain. Going. Track and report. Eyes only. Do not close with him. Can you do that? A pause. Yes, go. Keep your radio open. She heard his breathing change as he started moving. She increased her descent pace to the edge of what the terrain would permit. She hit the valley floor running. Omura's voice in her ear. He's in the dry wash at the north approach, moving fast. He's done this before. Keep talking. She ran the way she ran when there was no tactical choice available. The way her body remembered from high school in rural Georgia. From early morning runs in the canyon country, where her mother's family had land, from 22 years of having a body that she had been teaching to do difficult things, because she understood that the body was the instrument and the instrument required maintenance. She ran because Omura was alone and Rourke was cornered, which was the most dangerous version of Rourke available. The shot reached her before she was ready for it. A single crack from the north, and then Omura's voice louder and rougher than before. Contact. He had a secondary. I'm okay. Down behind cover. Distance to the wash exit? 20 meters. He's inside. Moving north. She assessed the terrain. The dry wash cut north for several hundred meters before bending west, providing concealment for anyone inside it. The ground east of the wash rose into a rock shelf, accessible from her angle, giving a sight line into the wash floor for approximately 50 meters before the bend. She moved right. She climbed the shelf in 2 minutes. She went prone, deployed the rifle, and looked through the scope into the wash. She saw him at once. Moving low and fast, the practiced movement of someone who had trained for exactly this scenario. He had a radio in his left hand. She could see his mouth moving. He was trying to transmit, trying to get word to the Istanbul address before the window closed. 62 meters. She had a clean shot. She did not take it, because a dead Rourke was a cut thread. A living Rourke in custody, with the triangulation data from Istanbul, with Kessler's 8 weeks of documentation, with the Channel 11 logs. A living Rourke was a door into every room this network had been operating in for years. Her mother deserved the room behind the door. Rourke, she said. He froze. She watched through the scope as he processed the direction the voice came from, as he understood from the specific impossibility of her being here. Here in this position, on this ground, that what she had been doing on the ridgeline was not only what she had been told to do, he understood the difference. She could see it in the way his shoulders changed. "Set the radio down," she said, "and your weapon." A long silence. "It's over, Joel," she said. The first name landed differently than the rank. It addressed the person beneath the calculation, the actual human being who had been making these choices and living with them. And something in that address reached him in the way that tactical instruction had not. His right hand opened. The radio hit the floor of the wash. He released the weapon. He stood slowly, hands clear of his body, and turned toward the direction of her voice. He couldn't see her. She was still and elevated and invisible to him. But he turned anyway, the reflex of a man who needed to face what was facing him. "Who are you?" he said. And the way he said it was not about her name or her rank. It was about what she represented, the thing he had not planned for. "My name is Carver," she said. "My mother was Sandra Carver, Senior Intelligence Analyst, DIA. She was killed in a man 4 years ago while building a case on the network you report to." She let that sit for 1 second. "You know whose name was in that case file. And in approximately 40 minutes, people with a great deal of patience and authority are going to start asking you to explain everything you know about it." Rourke stood with his hands up in the wash, said nothing. Omura arrived from the south 3 minutes later, breathing hard, moving clean despite the arm he was favoring. He zip-tied Rourke's wrists with hands that Carver could see were unsteady, not from fear she would understand later, but from the specific adrenaline of a young man who had just experienced in real time what the word betrayal actually cost. Kessler arrived 2 minutes after that. He looked at Rourke in restraints. He looked at Carver on the rock shelf, rifle across her lap, completely still. He looked at the receiver in her hand. "Did you get it?" he said. She held up the receiver. Kessler closed his eyes for 1 full second. When he opened them, he looked like a man who had just been able to put something down. "Let's go home," he said. She climbed down. Omura was beside her when she reached the floor. He had a field dressing on his left forearm, applied sometime during the last 20 minutes without mentioning it. She looked at the dressing. He shrugged. "Doesn't count?" "It counts," she said. He almost smiled. "Fair." She looked at the receiver in her hand, at the coordinates on its small screen, at the specific numbers that represented an address in Istanbul and a logistics company, and a signals annex her mother had flagged 14 months before she died. "She found it first," Omura said quietly. "She found it first," Carver said. "I just had to catch up." She put the receiver in her pack. She walked toward the extraction point. Above them, the desert light was changing, the quality of it shifting toward the particular gold of late afternoon that made the terrain look temporarily softer than it was. She put her hand in her jacket pocket, touched the photograph, did not take it out, just touched it, and kept walking. 2 months later, the Istanbul address was the subject of a joint operation involving 4 agencies across 3 countries. The logistics company was dismantled. 9 individuals were indicted across 2 jurisdictions. The cases of 4 intelligence personnel killed in compromised operations over the preceding 11 years, including Sandra Carver, senior analyst, Defense Intelligence Agency, were formally reclassified as targeted killings, with full honors and acknowledgement restored to each name. Rourke pleaded to 6 charges and did not go to trial. There was nothing left to argue. Carver received a formal reprimand for the unauthorized triangulation equipment. She received a commendation for 5 confirmed eliminations under adverse conditions. She received a promotion. The board that reviewed her case understood, with the specific institutional intelligence of people who read carefully, that the reprimand and the common commendation were not in contradiction. She requested a training assignment. She was given it. In her first class, she taught 11 young soldiers, men and women both, the fundamentals of what she had spent 9 years learning. That the work done in silence, in preparation, in the cold early mornings when nobody was watching, was the only real thing. That the moment of proof was not the moment of preparation. It was the accumulation of every other moment made visible. She told them what her mother had told her once, on a long drive through canyon country, when the sky was enormous, and the road was empty, and the world had not yet shown her the specific cost of the things she would be asked to pay. That intelligence work and patience were the same word, spelled differently. That the network you were building in your own mind, the slow, careful model of the problem in front of you, was the only tool that mattered when every other tool failed. That being right in the end only meant something if you had done the work to earn being right. She told them to pick up their maps and their notebooks and their patience. She told them the work was waiting, and the work did not care whether you believed in yourself, only whether you had done what was necessary before the moment arrived.